All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning for our webinar, Turning Threats and Uncertainty into an Actionable Plan. We're happy to have you here today, and as a quick reminder, all attendees are muted and videos shut off. However, we'd love for you to engage with our presenters today by using the chat feature. You can see it on the screen there. It's found at the bottom of your screen. You can find the chat feature by clicking the three dots on the bottom of your screen if you're on mobile, or selecting chat if you're joining from a computer. Before we begin, I would like to introduce our experts on the call today. We have David Whitmar and Dr. Brent Gloy, co-founders of Agriculture Economic Insights, as well as our very own Milo Ball. What's happening, Milo? Senior Financial Officer at Farm Credit Mid-America. As a reminder, this webinar is intended for informational purposes only and is not for public or media consumption. Any opinions expressed by the presenters are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of Farm Credit Mid-America. With all that being said, thank you again for joining us. This event will be recorded and distributed following this webinar. And at this time, I would like to go ahead and give it over to Dr. Brent Gloy.
Well, thank you, Luke. It's great to be here this morning. I am out in Southwest Nebraska, where I live, and I hear from what we were talking before the webinar. It's cold everywhere. Our temperature was 14 below this morning. Feels like negative 31. So, hey, I'm guessing that most of you are not quite that bad. So there's some positive news for you to start your day on an optimistic note. Could be Nebraska weather for you. So it's this is, I think, going to be a really good webinar. We're excited about it, and what we want to talk about is taking the threats and uncertainty that I think all of us can kind of agree that there's a lot of uncertainty right now out there in the ag economy. A lot of threats. I think wherever we turn, we can kind of see some potential for challenges, but that isn't going to stop us from planting a crop or raising our livestock this year. We're going to put our face forward and march forward and figure out what the best thing is that we can do. And that's what we want to talk to you about today, is give you some ideas for how to take those threats and turn them into a plan, so that we can be profitable and have a good year in 2025. As we get started this morning, one of the things I think we want to do is just kind of see what your headspace is and where everybody's at. And what I want you to do is think about what the challenges, what are the biggest challenges you see for 2025. And this is a poll, and if you look, at least on my screen, in the right hand side of your screen, there should be a poll that came up. And you can go ahead and you just go over there and use your mouse and click what you think is the biggest challenge you're facing in 2025 are. Is it crop margins are tight? Is it low crop prices in general? Is it, input costs are challenging? The farm balance sheet is maybe a little bit challenged. Is it worries about what's going on in the macro economy, or even uncertainties around tariffs? And I think when we put that list together, it wasn't hard to come up with a lot of different things that people are nervous about. So kind of curious to see what your thinking is on that as we go forward. So go ahead and click over in there. David, I don't know how long that poll will be open, but as we start to see some responses coming through, we'll kind of let you know. But
Just to give you some real-time reaction here, lean crop margins are leading the way, maybe as expected, but not far behind as our input costs, followed by the farm balance sheet. So those are the top concerns, if you will, at this given moment. But I do see tariff uncertainty is starting to rise, with 13% of the participants now indicating that is one of their concerns.
Yeah, well, thanks, Micah. That's helpful to know. And I think all of these things, I think at some level, are probably concerning for most of us. But as we go forward, one of the things we need to do is get a plan and a plan and some strategies for addressing the things that give us the biggest challenges. And what David's going to do here in the next segment is give you a couple tools to help you think about that. And I really like these because I know, as David put this webinar together and he showed it to me, and it really resonated with me just in my role on the farm as well. So he's going to talk to you here in a second about alligators and lighthouses. So David, I think I'll let you kick. Oh, so here we got a few results coming in, and I think those results that Mike had talked about held up pretty well. So, David, tell us about alligators and lighthouses.
Yeah, Brent, thanks for setting that up for us. And as we were thinking about this, exactly as you said, Brent, as we were preparing for this webinar, is there's a lot going out there. This list here is probably a subset of all the things that you're thinking about when you wake up, and probably still on your mind when you call it a day at the end of the night. And these are stories that you don't have to look very far to get an update on. These stories tend to find you, and so they can really, dominate the bandwidth of our mental capacity. And so, but as Brent said, we still have to make decisions. We still have to plant a crop, raise livestock, market our commodities, and still, make progress towards those long-term goals. And so, what we wanted to set up here is, two ideas: alligators and lighthouses, to help you, move forward in this. And the first one is an idea called closest alligator to the boat. And maybe you heard it's called closest target to the boat. And this often stems from the military. There's a lot of writing around this and even a book or two. But the idea here is focus on the alligator that's closest to the boat. You might be in a swamp full with hundreds or thousands of alligators, and if you stop and try to size up all of them and put together a plan, it can become overwhelming. But the idea here is just focus on the threat that's closest to you. And so the first step here that we've listed here is just identify what must get done this week, what has to get done this month, and then decide what gets done first and what gets done second. I think a lot of us intuitively do this on a daily basis. We all kind of have a startup sequence to our day, and we're probably doing this uh, in the background. But I think this is a very appropriate tool and a very helpful tool to think about, all of these uncertainties that we have in agriculture. Is like, okay, well, what do I need to do today? And probably worrying about, tariffs isn't something that we need to do first thing every morning, right? We probably have something else that's a little more higher priority. One of the limits to this idea here is there's always another alligator, right? You can go from fighting one alligator to the next alligator. There's always a fire to get put out, so to speak. So that's where we need to think about this tool, kind of one of the limits. A quick example here, I think that's going to resonate with all of you, is this is planting 2025 crops. You know that in the next 2 or 3 months you have to get that crop planted, and so there are things that you have to get done between now and finalizing planting. And so maybe there's rotation considerations you have to wrap up. Maybe there's some seed inputs that you still need to get picked up or put into position. Maybe there's still some repairs or updates to the planner that you're trying to make. And then finally, there's that final field work operations. And I think this is a great example of that closest alligator to the boat. There are things that have to get done first, and there before other things can be accomplished. So really focus on kind of turn down the noise by focusing on what's the most important thing to do today, and then work through that systematically. As I mentioned, the idea is that there's always another alligator to fight, and so that can be a limit to that mindset or that philosophy, that mental model. So the other one we wanted to add here is this idea of lighthouses. And the point here is we have to balance short-term and long-term thinking. If we get caught up just battling the next alligator, our boat's just going to kind of go in a circle, and we're going to stay in that swamp for an untold amount of time, just sort of worrying about that next alligator. The goal for lighthouses is to hit the pause button and say, what's our big picture goal? What are we wanting to row this boat towards? Which direction do we want to go? Maybe it's a transition plan for our operation. Maybe it's a working capital goal. Maybe it's a a growth or an expansion or diversification opportunity. But the idea here is create a long-term goal for you and your family and your business, share that, and then break that down. We've talked about this in previous episodes, but break this down into steps and milestones and timelines for reaching that goal. And so the idea here is that you need to focus on that alligator, that thing that you have to do today, but then create those steps and milestones to make sure that you're still rowing that boat in a direction that's going to eventually get you out of the current swamp that we're in. And one of the challenges with this idea of rowing towards lighthouses is there's always going to be some setbacks. There's always going to need to be some recalibration. So that could be a little bit frustrating. But the idea is that we want to make sure that we can balance fighting the alligators and making progress towards those long-term goals, those lighthouses. And we can do that by creating sort of self-imposed milestones and steps along the way. So I'm going to bring this together and then pass it over to Brent. He's going to walk us through some examples here. One of the first questions that you can think about whenever you're kind of thinking about all these threats and uncertainties is, okay, what are the alligators and what are the lighthouses? And, you know, if it's an alligator, how do I rank and order what needs to get done first, second, and third? If it's a lighthouse, how do I define that goal? Then how do I create steps and milestones to make sure that I'm making progress towards that goal? I think it's also helpful to really step back and ask yourself what's outside of our control. This is kind of like the weather might be outside of the control in this lighthouse alligator example. The weather can also be a factor for us making progress towards our goals, or policy implications, or geopolitical events. The final piece here is who can help. So who, as you're going through this, both alligators and lighthouses scenario, always be thinking about, you know, what is it that you're really good at? What is it that maybe is a shortcoming or a challenge for you to pursue or execute on? And then how can you bring someone to help boost that team, that board of advisors, and help you make progress in that way as well. So Brent, I'm going to pass it over to you and to give us a little bit of an example of a challenge that maybe producers are thinking about here today.
Yeah, David. Just wanted to kind of give you a little bit of a kind of a practical example. And so let's say that one of the issues that we're kind of focused on right now is trying to figure out how to reduce cash rents. And I think the first thing we have to decide is, you know, is this an alligator issue or a lighthouse issue? And that's kind of the urgency of it. But for most of us, that's going to be a longer term problem. It's not something that we can, you know, just fix immediately. Rather, it's a goal that we have to set to say, hey, maybe next year we need to work to trying to renegotiate next fall. And so one of the strategies or things we need to do in progressing toward that lighthouse is trying to set up some milestones. And as we think about negotiation, one of the key things that always helps is having good data and information. So if you go to any kind of negotiation kind of seminar or tutorial or something, one of the things they talk a lot about is information. And so one of the things we want to do is that gives us some milestones. We need to kind of look at our costs and the historical trends. Maybe think about what are, from the landowner's perspectives, what are their needs and priorities? What are some things we can do to provide kind of win-win scenarios in that renegotiation, so maybe both of us turn out to a better place? And then we, you know, think about putting that meeting together with the landowners and thinking about a summary of that proposal. Now, there's a few things that can kind of blow us off course in that time period, and that could be crop prices or government payments, competition, the landowner's reaction. All those things are a little bit outside of our control. And so I think we want to kind of get our head around that and start to think about how we can mitigate some of those things. And then as well as thinking about who can help us in that process. And, you know, think about your financial services officer as being a resource that can maybe help get you some data or help give you some perspective on that process. And so, you know, just as a way to give you an example, because I think most of us, when we think about these alligators and lighthouse type issues, um, it's easy to get overwhelmed by our kind of what's going on in the day to day, those alligators. And so if we think about the next slide, David, you know, we tend to get focused on that. Like, okay, I've got problems. And most of us, that's one of the things that's made us successful is figuring out, okay, hey, here, this target's close to, I'm going to address it. I'm going to get out of the way. I'm going to make progress toward the next one. The only challenge is that sometimes when we do that, we really can get overwhelmed and we can find ourselves way, way off track. And so one of the things like we said, tariffs are something a lot of people are concerned about. Well, I think it's important to kind of step back and say, okay, well, what is the underlying issue that is making tariffs a big issue for us and the bigger problem? And that might be cost structure on the farm. And so there's a lighthouse issue. Say, okay, we need to work toward reducing our cost structure so that we can survive a more volatile uh, financial environment. And that can move us off of just being obsessed with kind of reading about tariffs and things that are probably outside of our control, and we really can't do much about it. So as we think about those strategies, find that long-term progress where we can it's going to take months of effort to get to the lighthouse, months if not years. So set those goals. One of the key things that we like to focus on is getting good concrete goals that you can move your operation to. And these are not things, that you can just sit down and write on the back of an envelope today. I mean, you can get started that way, and I'm not going to discourage you from doing that, but I want you to put a lot of thought into those longer term goals and then thinking about some milestones to drive that progress. And these are kind of goals I think really important to discuss with some other people or your financial services officer and to chart our progress. And David always uses the example of, being off on a flight by your heading by 1 degree and how many miles you get off on, say, a coast to coast flight. It's dramatic. Even though 1 degree doesn't sound like very much, it can result in a really big deviation. So we want to revisit those goals and progress and make sure that we're driving toward it. So I think in summary, one of the other things we need to think about is just kind of all this noise that's around us and social media and other things. I think we're living in a world today where we're bombarded with noise. And sometimes we miss the longer term signals. And so we want to focus on tuning out that noise, moving toward the signal and those lighthouses of our long term goals. And I think no plan is perfect. You gotta realize that one of the things I tell my kids this all the time. One of the best examples my parents set is that they're they're very good at just doing stuff. Okay, they may not always be doing the right thing, but what they're very good at is if there's a problem, they just roll their sleeves up and do it. And that's a great example, I think, to people because that's how progress is ultimately made. There's no plan that's perfect. And if we wait for perfection, as Winston Churchill say, another way to spell perfection is paralysis. We don't get anywhere. So keep in mind those alligators are important and they can certainly sink your boat. But in the long term, we want to move toward those lighthouses that David identified.
All right, Brent. Well, thank you for that. And we're going to bring our lender expert for this month, Milo Ball, on to join us now. And he's going to help us think about how there are some practical examples of how producers can play this out for their operations. So, Milo, thanks for joining us.
Sir, glad to be here today.
I want to kick it off by having you share a little bit about yourself and your role with Farm Credit Mid-America.
Yes, sir. I work out at Northeast Arkansas. I'm a senior financial officer for Farm Credit Mid-America, and I cover the county of Mississippi County. It's a very large row crop county, primarily rice, cotton, peanuts, corn, and soybeans. We're 90 something percent irrigated. Very blessed with that. We got a great aquifer to be able to take care of our crops to get the max yield we can get. We have no cattle in our area, but we definitely like eating beef. We just don't have much here to work with. So, but yeah, that's what I primarily do. Been here about 7 years. I came before this. I was in the chemical seed and fertilizer sales.
Well, great. Well, Britt and I listed several of the threats that and uncertainties that we thought we saw that poll result. But as a lender and as you talk with producers in your area, is there one that really stood out to you for 2025?
Yes, it was definitely the input cost. They had great yields. Some of the crops were fairly priced okay. Some we did have a little bit of quality issues in our grain due to the hurricanes, but it's really the input cost at the end of the year, the sticker shock of seeing those bills coming in, and they had more bills than they did, income coming in. And that was a big, killer for a lot of them.
You told us about a cost saving approach that producers in your area have been using. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how that got started?
Yes, there's a guy that I actually used to previously work with in the chemical seed and fertilizer world, and he took upon himself to get about 6 growers to go together that grow the same similar crops and chemistries, and so they get you got 6 different growers that were all from 3 to 5,000 acres, and all of a sudden you got 30,000 acres of buying power. And he conglomerated that, and he went out to the chemical companies and all the other competitors and said, "What's your best price? I got 30,000 acres worth of opportunity for you to take." And just priced it around. It really saved the growers a lot of time, for them not having to negotiate. They could all go through one guy, and but it saved. They're thinking 12 to 18% overall.
Yeah, it's a great example of, I want to lower costs. So there's this alligator on the budget where we want to say, how do we get this cost under control? And then you build a long-term goal and you make a lot of steps and milestone progress to get that. That doesn't happen overnight, right? That takes a lot of coordination, and a lot of planning.
Yeah, absolutely. That's they started, when they decided to do it. I mean, right after the crop was out, just to really see where everybody's what they plan to grow that next year, and we know we need X amount of seed and this and that, and which way they wanted to go. I mean, it was definitely to make it profitable for that year. They had to start, 6 months before. So.
Another idea that we shared as part of those steps is who can help. Thinking about who can help you make progress towards these lighthouses and also fighting off those alligators. What are some of your thoughts on that space?
I think leaning towards your accountant and your financial officer, and just, I mean, I know we can only share so much with them, but we can kind of show them what they're weak at and what the benchmark is for certain parts of their financials, and kind of tell them, hey, this rent that you're paying compared to others in the area, I can't really tell you who it is. You're paying a little high, or you're about right, just to give them an idea of what they're facing that they may not realize.
There are two other stories around cost cutting, that we discussed earlier. One was about equipment, and one was about really watching the details. Can you share those stories with us here?
Yes, sir. I got two. They used to farm together. There's two brothers that farm together, and they split when they had sons, but they still kind of operate out of the same headquarters, and they both grown quite a bit really quick. And anyways, the times got kind of tough, and they're more sharing. I've noticed that with a lot of growers, the tougher the times, the more they share with each other. I mean, they're leaning on each other, and they're definitely leaning on each other. And I mean, they just drove around their lot one day with all their equipment, and just kind of realized, hey, we can utilize some of this equipment together and share that cost and save, overall, and get rid of a few pieces, which saves money in insurance and repair bills and labor and all. So I think that really helped us last year. I think we're going to continue to do more this year. And then the other deal, I think I done forgot about this one. Was will you refresh my mind on that? I'm so sorry. Was
Yeah, we were brainstorming, and the idea was another generation wanted to be part of the operation, and they looked at just the dollars of outlay and the
Yeah.
growth perspective. It's like this is going to be a little tight, but this next generation was able to step up and really review current processes, current invoicing, double check the bills, double check the cash flow, and was able to create quite a bit of savings. $50,000 to $60,000, and just dotting the i's and crossing the t's, so to speak.
Yes, sir. I do remember that scenario was there's a girl that she wanted to come back and be on the farm, and and they said, well, it's kind of tight. We'd have to find a way to save money to get you, or get you to utilize your skills with us. And I mean, she went right to work and got to looking at the bills and stuff, and she found about $60,000 in billing errors, and she proved her worth and said, I'll take that 60,000 of my salary, to help you in your farm, which helps them continue going further, and then saves them time of looking at the bills. She can do that. And then I got another example when I was at the chemical company where um, someone was paying the bills, but they wouldn't negotiating the prices, and then so that person was paying the bills didn't know what the true price was. And anyways, there's well over $100,000 in errors came out real quick when the guy sat down that did the negotiating on prices. So definitely look at it. I mean, it pencils out at the. I mean, at the end, most times, if you look at every bill, don't just think that one is okay. Don't assume. Look at it.
It's just a great example of how when we go into cost cutting mode, we typically think of how do we negotiate these variable costs to get a better price. And there's a lot of ways of sizing it up. So we could share equipment, we could, work with our neighbors in a lot of different ways, but we can also think about our internal processes and how we could do a better job internally. So great points there. The final question that I have, and then we're going to get to the questions and answers from the listeners today. Do you have any final thoughts to share with us as we wrap up this first part of the conversation?
I'd say be open to change. We got a grower that's starting to really use AI to the full potential. He's he's very technology savvy. He's looking at a thing right now, or like I said earlier, we're high on irrigation around here, so we got these big pumps going that's running off diesel motors. And I mean, he showed me a thing the other day that shows what's the optimum RPMs he can run that machine to get the gallons of water pumping out, but the least amount of fuel being burnt at the same time. And he looked it up and kind of figured what he burnt last year, and if he had the same environments this year, he could save about 6% on his fuel overall. So utilize the tools you got in front of you, and don't be afraid to change, because we're all guilty of that.
All right, Milo, that's a great place to wrap up here. I really appreciate you helping us prepare for today, for joining us and sharing those practical boots on the ground observations and experiences that you had. We'll kick it back over to Luke, who's I think got some questions from the audience for us to navigate here.
Yeah, anxiously awaiting here to get you guys' thoughts on the first question we have. The first question is, how do you guys suggest navigating asking for reduced land rents when government payments are maybe in the headlines? Any suggestions on that?
Yeah, I think that's a challenge for sure. And I think one of the key things is transparency and just showing, you got to be transparent with people, because they see numbers and they get the may get the wrong or maybe or correct assumptions about what you're receiving. And so I think it's important to kind of share the facts of the situation with them, so that they, is one of the first things you need to do.
And maybe one of the things to think about is the structure of the rental agreement. Sometimes these flex leases are popular and when there's a lot of volatility to the upside and maybe the downside. So there's a base rent, and then there's some sort of bonus paid as commodity prices or yields go up. And so maybe there's a way to incorporate some of these ad hoc government payments as part of that structure of those bonuses that get included in that. I think it's just like Brent said, a lot of transparency, a lot of, I think one of the challenges is that the payments we're going to get this spring are going to be for economic losses of last year. And so that's going to, but they're going to impact the returns, the profitability, the working capital, and the cash flow in 2025. So I think it's a lot of transparency, and I think it's a lot of, kind of creativity about how do you line up and match the needs and the desires of the landowner.
And I think the other challenge is to try and help explain that part of the reason those payments are coming is because of just an unfavorable situation overall. And so, yeah, it's a, I don't want to say an education, but a communication issue.
Yeah, those are definitely good insights there for that question. I know we're butting up against time here at 30 minutes, but if you have additional questions, any of you guys that are tuned in here to the webinar, go ahead and put those in the chat. I did want to just toss one question to Milo. You know, we talked about alligators and lighthouses, and I really liked that analogy that you guys used there. But when do you suggest, at least for your customers, and we talked about working with your financial services officer, when do you suggest that those conversations kind of take place? I feel like we usually get into the weeds here, and when we have a problem, that's when we reach out. But Milo, do you talk to your the folks that you work with a little bit more about, hey, let's start getting ahead of these things and then working through them, and then how do we kind of keep on the same page as we're reaching for those lighthouses?
Absolutely. The earlier the better. I mean, and that's where we see our stronger customers. They're coming in earlier than our weaker ones, and it really needs to be opposite. And that's what I see is a big difference because the ones that you get this time of year and you ain't been in here yet. You know you've had a lot of sleepless nights for 3 months that you might not have needed to have if you would have came in 3 months ago and we already had the plan done because the numbers are already pretty well there for 24 to make your decision for 25. So definitely the earlier better, and we're going to do everything we can to make it right and get you going for another year. But you know, don't lose those sleepless nights when we can get it done earlier than they realize.
Appreciate that. One more, I suppose, David and Dr. Goy, if we have time. Recommendations, going back to our poll, for a fix for decreasing working capital right now. Any recommendations for helping to build that back up?
Well, I'll probably let Milo take some of that, but it's funny that one came up because that was one Dave and I were talking about, and I said I thought that was that's more of an alligator issue because that working capital is something that is really critical. It can lead to really intense kind of financial stress, so we want to get that one addressed pretty quickly, and um, as opposed to and we also want to have a longer term plan because it is something that is going to take a longer term to kind of get the ship right. So I think there's two issues: is what's causing the shortage of working capital and how do we fix it. And part of it is the earnings engine of the business is not working quite as well as it should, and we need to figure out why that's the case. And then the other, it could be a structure issue. So maybe we got too much short-term debt service that's required. So, we can stretch some of those debt payments out, kind of reduce the initial debt service, get the working capital position built back up, or we spent that working capital on investment maybe that was nice, but we may have not financed it at the right rate, so we burn up a lot of that working capital and didn't generate it back. So there's multiple issues there as to why we're having the shortage. Is it kind of our earnings are not as good as we want, or did we kind of misallocate, or were we a little bit too aggressive in our short-term management? And I don't know if anybody else wants to have that conversation.
Yeah,
Milo, I don't know if you have any insights there, if you've seen different ways that people have gotten creative or either, had different enterprises, especially since you guys are so diverse down there in Arkansas, for, breaking things up by enterprise and what's profitable, what's not. How do we kind of recharge that working capital? What should we pay down first? That kind of stuff. And I think probably it varies customer by customer, if I had to guess. But any insights there other than that, Milo?
Yeah, I think we got several down here that does a lot of land improvements, and they take it out of their operating loan and don't really term that out. And I mean, there's some huge expenses. I mean, it might be $200,000 on leveling a big tract of ground that they're taking out of their operating that we could term out for a land improvement long-term loan, you know, to make it work better, get their work capital back stronger, because that's a longer term investment that we can justify doing a longer term loan on.
And I think going back to that discussion of having that conversation with folks like Milo early and often, we're here to hopefully help you out at Farm Credit Mid-America. We got a lot of people like Milo who are really sharp when it comes to looking at your situation and helping get you back on the right track. So anyway, we appreciate that. I don't see a whole lot of other questions from the audience here. So as long as there are no final thoughts from David, Dr. Gloy, or Milo Ball, we will go ahead and end the webinar here. You guys have any final thoughts?
Thanks for joining us. Stay warm and good luck in 2025.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, guys.
You